The Rosicrucian and Christianity Lectures by Max Heindel. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Lecture 7. Birth, a Fourfold Event. When we left the ego in its pilgrimage through the invisible worlds, we had reached the point where it entered the third heaven, after having discarded the dense body at death, the vital body shortly afterwards, the desire body upon leaving purgatory and the first heaven, and finally before leaving the second heaven, it also left the sheath of the mind behind, and then entered the third heaven absolutely free of any encumbrance. All the discarded vehicles decay. Only the spirit persists, laving for a while in the great spiritual reservoir of force which we call the third heaven, in order to fortify itself for the next rebirth into earth life. Sir Edwin Arnold has put this idea so poignantly and beautifully in his Song Celestial, where he says, "Never the spirit was born. The spirit shall cease to be never. Never was time, it was not. End and beginning are dreams. Birthless and deathless, the spirit remaineth forever. Death has not touched it at all. Dead, though the house of it seems. Nay, but as one layeth his worn-out robe away, and taking another saith, This will I wear today, so putteth by the Spirit lightly its garment of flesh, and passeth on to inherit a residence afresh." The law of consequence determines our existence after death in accord with the life we have lived here. If in earth life we were mostly given to low desires and passions, our purgatorial existence is the most vivid part of our post-mortem state. The existence in the various heavens will be insipid. If we lived in the higher emotions, life in the first heaven will be the richest of the different stages. Did we love to plan improvements, and was our mind constructive in earth life? Then we shall have great benefit from our stay in the second heaven, where concrete thought is the basis of concrete things on earth. But in order to have a conscious existence in the third heaven, we must have given time and effort to abstract thought, which had no relation to time or space. Most of us are incapable of thinking abstractly, and therefore we lack consciousness in the third heaven. If we think of love, we associate it with some person. We dislike mathematics because it is dry, unemotional, and abstract. There is no feeling connected with the statement that twice 2 is 4, but it is this very fact which is of value, for when we rise above feeling, we leave bias behind, and truth is at once apparent. No one would say that twice 2 is 5, or quarrel over the proposition that the squares of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other sides of a triangle. That was the reason why Pythagoras and other occult teachers demanded that applicants for tuition should first have a knowledge of mathematics. A mind used to grappling with mathematics is trained in sequential thought, capable of testing truth apart from bias, and only such a mind can be safely given occult training. The great majority of people are not yet past the stage where they properly progress along what is called practical lines, and for them the third heaven is simply a waiting place where they are unconscious, as in sleep, until the time is ripe for a new birth. The man, for instance, who had lived a low life of sense gratification, who had been utterly destructive, would have a painful existence in purgatory, as he had been very bad. He would rapidly and unconsciously pass through the first heaven because he had done no good. His destructiveness would render his life in the second heaven almost unconscious, and he would have absolutely no existence in the third heaven, where advanced egos evolve original ideas which later manifest as genius in earth life. Hence, such a backward ego would remain asleep until the time for a new birth would awaken it to another day in life's school, another chance of improvement. We often hear people say, upon first hearing this doctrine, "Oh, but I don't want to come back." That is the cry of the weary and tired body, the consequence of a hard life. But as soon as the experience of that life has been assimilated in heaven, the law of consequence and desire for more knowledge draws the ego back to earth as a magnet draws a needle, and it begins to contemplate a re-embodiment. Here again, the law of consequence is the determining factor. The new birth is conditioned by our past lives. Having lived many times, it is evident, of course, that we have met many different persons and had varying relations with them, affecting them for good or ill. or we have been thus acted upon by them. Causes were thus generated between them and us, and many were left fallow, as it were, unable to produce their sequential effect, for one reason or another. The invariableness of law requires that these causes should find their consummation some time, and so the recording angels, who are the great intelligences in charge of the law of adjustment, look up the past of each man at the time he is ready for a new birth, and find out who among the friends or foes are living at that time and where they are. As we have made an enormous number of such relations in our past, there are generally several groups of such people in earth life, and if there are no special reasons why one of them in particular should then be taken, the recording angel gives the ego its choice of the opportunities offered. They select in each case the amount of ripe causation that the ego is thus to work out, and show to the ego in a series of pictures a panorama of what the coming life will be in each of the proposed lives, any of which the ego may then choose. These panoramas run from the cradle to the grave, and give the great outline of the life, but leave room for the ego to fill in the details by new or free will action. Thus, the ego has a certain latitude as to the place of birth, and it may therefore be said that in the great majority of cases we are where we are by our own choice. It matters not that we do not know it in our brain. The ego is yet weak, and not able to freely penetrate the veil of flesh, is largely dependent even upon the lower personality to help it grow, and the more we determine in our brain mind to live for the higher self, the sooner the day will come when the ego will shine through, and we shall know. When the ego has made its choice, it is bound by that choice to go through with the adjustments of debts contracted in former lives and now ripe for liquidation. That then forms the destiny or the hard and fast conditions of life which cannot possibly be changed. Any attempt to do so will surely be frustrated, but let no one fall into the delusion that his destiny compels him to do wrong at any time. The law works only for good, and as we have seen, the evil in any life is the first thing purged after death, and only the tendency to do this particular wrong remains, with the feeling of aversion generated by the suffering experienced in the process of expurgation. When the temptation to commit a similar evil act comes in a later life, this feeling of past pain, which we call conscience, warns and repels us from yielding to the temptation. If we fall in spite of this warning voice, the suffering we experience in purgatory will add to and strengthen the previous feeling until our conscience develops the necessary stability to resist the particular evil involved, and from that moment it ceases to be a temptation to us. Thus we see that no man is ever fated to do wrong, that at least every evil act is an act of free will, committed even against the resistance of whatever amount of conscience we have previously developed regarding that particular phase of evil. The question as to the coming rebirth having been decided, the ego descends first into the region of concrete thought and begins to draw to itself the materials for a new mind. As said previously, the man withdraws from his different bodies in the course of his post-mortem career. These bodies go to decay, but there is an atom saved from each, one from the mind also, and it is those so-called seed atoms which are the nuclei of the new vestures in which the spirit will appear in its coming life. When now the ego descends into the region of concrete thought, the latent forces in the seed atom of the mind of its previous lives are aroused into activity, and it begins to draw to itself the materials for a new mind, as a magnet draws iron filings around its poles. If we hold a magnet over a heap of shavings of brass, iron, gold, lead, silver, wood, etc., we shall find that it will only take the iron filings, and also that it will take only a certain quantity according to its strength. Its attractive power is limited to a certain quantity of a particular kind. So with the seed atom, it can attract in each region only such materials as it has affinity for, and only a certain definite quantity. This material then forms itself into a great bell-shaped thing, open at the bottom and with the seed atom at the top. This may be likened to a diving bell, diving into a sea of gradually increasing density. The materials taken from each realm and woven into the bell add to its weight, so as to make it sink farther and farther until it reaches the bottom. Thus the returning ego sinks through the region of concrete thought, and in the passage the seed atom gathers the materials for the new mind. The descent continues. The ego, clothed in its bell-shaped garment of mind stuff, sinks into the desire world. The forces of the seed atom, saved from its former desire body, are awakened and placed inside a top of the bell. Thence it draws to itself the kind and quantity of the materials needed to furnish the returning ego with a new desire body appropriate to its particular needs, so that when the densest region of the desire world has been reached, there are two layers in the bell, the sheath of mind stuff on the outside and the materials for the desire body inside. The next step downwards brings the spirit into the etheric region, where the materials for the new vital body are gathered, and from a part of that material, the agents of the recording angels fashion a mold or matrix which is placed in the womb of the mother to give appropriate form to the new dense body, while the seed atom is placed in the semen of the father. Without the presence of these two factors, no union of the sexes will bring results, and when a marriage is barren, though both partners are healthy and desirous of children, it means simply that no incoming ego is attached to them. As soon as the vital body has been placed, the returning ego, clothed in its bell-shaped covering, hovers constantly near the future mother. She alone does the work upon the new dense body in the first 18 to 21 days after fertilization. Then the ego enters the mother's body, drawing the bell-shaped covering down over the fetus. The opening at the bottom closes, and the ego is once more incarcerated in the prison house of the dense body. The moment of entrance into the womb is one of great importance in life, for when the incoming ego first contacts the before-mentioned matrix vital body, it sees there again the panorama of the coming life which has been impressed upon the matrix by the recording angels in order to give it the tendencies required to work out the ripe causation due to be liquidated in the coming life. At this time, the ego is already so much blinded by the veil of matter that it does not recognize the good end in view in the same unbiased manner as when making its choice in the region of abstract thought, and when a particularly hard life reveals itself to the vision of the returning ego at the moment of entering the womb, it sometimes happens that the ego is so startled and frightened that it seeks to rush out again. The connection cannot be severed, however, but may be strained, so that instead of the vital body being concentric with the dense body, the head of the vital body may be above the head of the dense body. Then we have a congenital idiot. Under the most favorable conditions, it is a great strain for the ego to go through the womb, and everything should be done by the parents not to make it more aggravated than necessary. We can never tell where the breaking point is. Inharmonious relationship between the parents at the critical periods of gestation, particularly the first, may sometimes prove the last straw. Before the event we term birth, the coming man is enclosed in another body, the mother's, and thus unable to directly contact the sense world. This seclusion is necessary to bring the organism to the proper point of maturity, where it is fit to receive these impressions itself. When that point is reached, the protective covering of the womb opens, and the new human being enters the arena of the world. As we have seen, man is a great deal more than the mere dense body, and it must not be imagined that all his vehicles are equally mature when he is born into the physical world. As a matter of fact, they are not. The vital body grows and ripens inside its covering of ether until the 7th year, or the changing of the teeth. The desire body requires protection from the onslaughts of the desire world until about the 14th year it is born, at the time we call puberty. And the mind is not sufficiently ripe to be released from its protective cover until the man reaches his majority at about 21. These periods are only approximately correct, for each person differs from all others in regard to the exact time periods, but those given are near enough. The reason for this slow unfoldment of the higher vehicles lies in the fact that they are comparatively recent additions to the economy of the ego, while the dense body has had much the longest evolution and is by far the most perfect and valuable instrument we possess. When people who have sometimes but recently come to a knowledge of the existence of higher vehicles are constantly talking and thinking of how nice it would be to fly off in the desire body and leave the low and vile physical, it shows that they have not yet learned to appreciate the difference between higher and perfect. The dense body is a marvel of perfection, with its strong articulated skeleton, its delicate sense organs, its coordinating mechanism of nerve and brain, which makes it superior to any other mechanism in the world. Looked at in detail, take for instance the large bone of the thigh, the femur, and examine the thick ends. If we split it open, we shall see that only a thin outside shell is made of compact bone. This is stiffened by beams and crossbeams of thin, cancellated bone, making it of prodigious strength, coupled with a lightness as far beyond the skill of the greatest living structural engineer as differential calculus is beyond an ant. Therefore, though we realize that some day in the distant future our higher vehicles will attain a perfection far, far beyond that of our dense body, we must remember that at present they are more or less unorganized and are of little value when detached from the perfect physical organism, and we should in all things give thanks to the exalted beings who helped us to evolve this splendid instrument, whereby we are now functioning in the world as self-conscious human beings and working out our destiny, life after life, becoming each time a little more like our Father in heaven. Thus we see that birth is a fourfold event, and in order to do our full duty as educators, it is absolutely necessary that we should know this and the facts that follow from it. We cannot easily tear the unborn babe out of the womb and expose it to the impacts of the outside world. To do so would kill it. It is equally dangerous to break through the wombs of the unseen bodies and expose the immature child to the impacts of the moral and mental world, and though such a proceeding does not always kill the dense body, it invariably stunts its capacity, for what hurts one body is detrimental to the other vehicles. To educate the child properly, it is therefore necessary to have a knowledge of the effect of training upon the different vehicles and the right methods to employ, bearing in mind constantly, however, that general rules do not always apply in individual cases. We saw that when the ego had finished its day in the school of life, the centrifugal force of repulsion caused it to throw off its dense vehicle at death, then the vital body, which is the nearest coarsest. Next in purgatory, the coarsest desire stuff accumulated by the ego as embodiment for its lowest desires was purged by this centrifugal force. In the higher realms, only the force of attraction holds sway and keeps the good by centripetal action, which tends to draw everything from the periphery to the center. This centripetal force of attraction also governs when the ego is coming to rebirth. We know that we can throw a stone farther than we can throw a feather. Therefore, the coarsest matter was thrown outwards after death by the force of repulsion, and for the same reason the coarsest material wherein the returning ego embodies the tendency to evil is whirled inwards to the center by the centripetal force of attraction, with the result that, when a child is born, all that is best and purest appears on the outside. The latent evil does not usually manifest until after the desire body is born at about the age of 14, and the currents in that vehicle commence to well outwards from the liver. At that time the ego commences to live its individual life and show what is within. The stars are the clock of destiny. They show the hidden tendencies, and while astrologers are fallible in prediction of events, a good and careful astrologer will be able to reveal the character of a person accurately in 99% of all cases. Thus parents may obtain a guide to the hidden side of a child's nature, but it requires very little ability to cast a horoscope, and it is always better for the parents to learn than to employ a stranger. They will then get a much deeper insight into the character of their child. With the physical birth, the dense body begins to feel the impacts of the outside world, which act upon it as the forces of the mother's body previously did. What these did during antenatal life, the impacts of the elements continue all through physical life. Up to the time of the 7th year, or change of teeth, there was one particular activity going on, which is widely different from the activities of the succeeding epochs of life. The sense organs take certain definite forms which give them their basic structural tendencies and determine their line of development in one direction or another. Later they grow, but all growth follows the lines laid down in those first 7 years, and the mistakes or neglect of opportunities during this period can seldom be retrieved in after life. If the limbs and organs have taken the proper forms, the whole aftergrowth will be harmonious, but if malformation takes place then, the little body will be more or less misshapen. It is the duty of the educator to give the proper environment to the little child in this period, as nature does before birth, for only that can give the sensitive organism the right direction and tendency of growth. There are two magic words which denote the manner in which the child comes into contact with the formative influences of its environment: example and imitation. There is under the whole heaven no creature so imitative as a little child, and in this imitation we have the force which gives tendency and direction to the little organism. Everything in a child's environment leaves its impress for good or evil, and we should realize that our slightest action may do incalculable harm or good in the life of our children, and we ought never to do anything in the presence of the child which we would not be perfectly willing to have it imitate. It is no use to teach it to mind or to moralize at this period. Example is the only teacher the child needs or heeds. It cannot help imitating any more than water can help running downhill, for that is its only method of growth in this epoch. Teaching of morals and reason comes later. To apply them now is like taking a child out of the womb prematurely. All that the child is to acquire of thoughts, ideas, and imagination must come of itself in the same way that the eyes and ears develop before the birth of the dense body. The child should be given playthings on which it may exercise its imitative faculty, something with life, or a doll, jointed so that it can be put in different positions, and let the child dress it herself. In that way she exercises her formative force in the right manner. Give the boys tools and patterns, or molds and clay. Never give them anything finished, where they have nothing to do but look at it. That leaves the brain no chance for development, and it must ever be the care and aim of the educator at this time to furnish the means of developing the physical organs harmoniously. In regard to food, great care must be taken in this period, for a healthy or diseased appetite in after life will depend upon how it is fostered in the first septenary epoch. Here also is the great teacher. Highly seasoned dishes spoil the organism. The plainer the food and the more it is conducive to thorough mastication, the more it promotes a healthy appetite that will guide the man through life and give him the health of body and ease of mind that is unknown to the gourmand. Let us not have one dish for ourselves, however, and another for our child. In that way we may keep it from eating it at home, but we generate a hankering that will seek satisfaction when it gets old enough to have a will of its own. The imitative faculty will then assert itself. In regard to clothing, let us always be sure that a child's apparel is of full size and is replaced before it becomes so small that it irritates. Many an immoral nature that has spoilt the life was first awakened by the chafing of a too small garment, particularly in the case of boys. Immorality is one of the worst and most tenacious plague spots in our civilization. To save our child, let us attend to this point, and seek in every way to keep it unconscious of its sex organ before the 7th year. Corporeal punishment is also an exceedingly fruitful factor in forcing the sex nature, and cannot be sufficiently deprecated. In regard to the education of the temperament, it will be found that colors are of the greatest significance, although the matter involves not only a knowledge of the effect of colors, but particularly of the complementary colors, for it is the latter that do the work in the organism of the child. If we have to deal with a boisterous, hot-tempered nature, it is soothed and softened by an environment of red. Rooms, furniture, and clothing of red will produce in the child the cooling green effect and calm its nerves. One who is of a melancholy and lethargic nature will be roused to action and life by an environment of blue or blue-green, which creates in the child's organs the warm, rousing red or orange. Nursery rhymes are of the greatest importance in this period. It does not matter so much about the sense they have as about the rhythm. That is of supreme importance and builds the organs in a harmony not realized by any of the other aids. Therefore, this and a cheerful atmosphere are of the greatest of all means of education, and will even make up to a great extent for the lack of others. By the 7th year, the vital body of the child has reached a perfection sufficient to allow it to receive impacts from the outside world. It sheds its protective covering of ether and commences its free life. And now the time begins in which the educator may work on the vital body and help it in the formation of memory, conscience, good habits, and a harmonious temperament. Authority and discipleship are the watchwords of this epoch, when the child is to learn the meaning of things. In the first epoch, it learns that things are, but must not be bothered about their meaning, except what it picks up of its own accord. But in the second epoch, from 7 to 14 years, it is essential that the child should learn the meaning of them, but should learn to take things on the authority of parents and teachers, memorizing their explanations rather than reasoning for itself, for reason belongs to a later development, and though he may do so of his own accord, with profit, it is harmful at this period to force him to think. In order that the growing child should derive the proper benefit from the instruction of parents and teachers, it is of course necessary that he should have the greatest veneration for them, and admiration for their wisdom, and it behooves us to comport ourselves so that he may always retain it. For if he sees in us frivolity, hears light talk, and observes a generally loose conduct, we deprive him of the greatest staff of strength in life, faith and trust in others. It is in this age that cynics and skeptics are made. We are responsible to God for the lives committed to our care, and will have to answer to the law of consequence if we neglect, through slothful conduct, the great opportunity for guiding the early steps of a fellow being in the right path, and example is always better than precept. There is little use of warnings. Let us show the child living examples of the effects of virtue and vice, paint before his youthful fantasy a picture of the drunkard and thief, and others of the saint. That will affect his vital body in such a way that there will be an abhorrence of the one and an ardent purpose to emulate the other. In this period, the child should also be instructed in the origin of his being, so that he may be well prepared for the storm time of passion which makes adolescence so dangerous. That information should also be given in mental picture and examples from nature, but in such a way as to thoroughly impress the child with the sanctity of the function. It is the bounden duty of the educator to properly enlighten the child. Not to do this is like putting him blindfolded among innumerable pitfalls, with the admonition not to stumble. Tear the bandage away at least. He will be handicapped sufficiently without that. Let the instructor take a flower, which is the generative organ of the plant, and teach from that, for one who understands the process of generation in the plant will understand it in animal and man also. Let us avoid the mistake of giving the child many names to grapple with, such as stamen and anthers, or pistillate and staminate. That would frustrate our object by making the children tired of the study. They like fairy tales, and the skillful instructor can make the story of the flower more fascinating than any fairy tale known, and in addition may throw a halo of beauty and sanctity over the generative act, which will hover over the child all through life to protect it in temptation and trial when the fires of passion surge around it. We know that the stamen and pollen are male, the pistil and ovule female, also that some flowers have only one kind, others another kind, and still others have both stamen and pistil. We also know that the bees have pollen baskets on their legs and carry pollen to the pistils of other flowers. There the pollen works its way to the ovule, which is then fertilized and capable of growing into a new plant and flowers. With these data and some flowers, let us gather the children. Let us tell them and show them how flowers are like families. In some, the staminate, there are only boys. In others, the pistillate, there are only girls. And in some there are both boys and girls. The flower boys, pollen, are as adventuresome as human boys. They ride away into the wide world on winged steeds, bees, as the old-time knights did, and search for the princess immured in her magic castle, the ovule in the pistil. The little flower boy knight dismounts from his steed, the bee, and works his way into the secret chamber where the princess, ovule, is. Then they are married and have lots of little flower boys and girls. This narrative may be varied and embellished to suit the fancy of the educator, and can later be supplemented with stories of birds and animals. It will awaken in the child an understanding of the genesis of its own body that will invest the love story of Papa and Mama with all the romance of the flower boys and girls, and obviate the slightest thought of odium connected with birth in the mind of the child. The desire body is born about the 14th year at the time of puberty. That is the time the feelings and passions are beginning to exercise their power upon the young man or woman, as the womb of desire stuff which formerly protected the nascent desire body is removed. This is in most cases a trying time, and it is well for the youth who has learned reverently to look to parents or teachers, for they will be to him an anchor of strength against the inrush of the feelings. If he has been accustomed to take the statements of his elders on trust, and they have given him wise teaching, he will by now have developed an inherent sense of truth that will be a sure guide, but just in the measure that he has failed to do so, will he be liable to go adrift. It is now the time that he should be taught to investigate things for himself, and thus to form individual opinions. Let us always impress upon him the necessity of careful investigation before he judges, and also that the more fluidic he can keep his opinions, the better he will be able to examine new facts and acquire new knowledge. In this way, he will reach his majority at 21, when the mind is also fully free, and will be able to take his place in the world as a full-fledged citizen, a credit to those whose loving care shielded him in his years of development, a thoroughbred man or woman